Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to our live webinar on student mental health and well-being. My name is Rob Gould, Vice President of Student and Canadian Business Solutions at Workplace Options. We have a great panel of guests with us today, and we encourage you to send us any questions throughout this discussion and post them in the questions box that you see on your screen. We'd also like to let you know that this will be an interactive event with 3 poll questions, and we encourage you to share your thoughts and participate in these poll questions. Today, we have with us Andrew Maher, Director of Clinical Service Delivery, Europe for Workplace Options. Andrew has over 15 years of senior management experience and is a fully accredited psychotherapist and cross-professional supervisor. He has a passion for training and engagement and has delivered trainings and workshops across several mental health topics. Andrew specializes in working with crisis and trauma and holds individual and group crisis intervention qualifications. He also actively holds down a private practice where he supports children and adolescents on a weekly basis. Kathleen Keeley is the student advisor in the School of Medicine at University College Dublin. She manages the undergraduate STEM student advisors within the university, providing support to them in their role as a student advisor. Kathleen also manages the postgraduate student advisor for research students. She has been in student support roles within UCD since 2006. Welcome to all. Before we get started, we do want to begin with a poll. So the first poll question is, what do you believe is the biggest barrier to seeking help for mental health issues amongst students? So I'll give you a couple of seconds. Please do not be shy. With your participation, we will have a much more dynamic and engaging event. And just a couple of more seconds. Okay. First question for today. Research gathered by YouGov, a British research and data analytics firm, which surveyed 1,000 students, indicate that loneliness was experienced by 92% of students. That same study also indicated that loneliness came ahead of other concerns reported by students, such as financial difficulty, challenges with courses, and finding affordable housing. What is contributing to students' feelings of isolation and lack of sense of belonging on campuses? Kathleen, why don't you start off?
Yeah, I think one of the main opportunities that can be lost in overcoming the loneliness for students that are starting college is missing opportunities in orientation week. I think orientation is the key to the students, beginning to build their sense of belonging in the university. I think they don't realize how many other students are feeling lonely, and I think the programs like, I know in UCD we do a peer mentor program, which we match up students with students from their own country and background in order for them to be able to give them a sense of what's ahead of them for the year, because these peer students had just done it the year before. And I think the key to overcoming the loneliness is creating and building on that sense of belonging. Once somebody, it's not about necessarily always fitting in, it's about them feeling that they belong, feeling that they're part of the experience.
Andrew, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, following on from what Kathleen was saying there, I definitely agree. I mean, it's definitely start as how you mean to go on. So the orientation is really, really important. But if we're also talking about international students, I suppose that's another kind of dynamic to it as well, where language barrier, etc., and cultural nuances as well could, definitely create a barrier in relation to, a lack of a sense of belonging. And one of the real interesting things about a sense of belonging, it's really closely linked to better well-being. That might sound extremely obvious, but it really is. If I feel that I'm belonging or I'm connected with something, that impacts on my well-being. Like vice versa, if I don't feel connected, my well-being isn't so good. And from Other aspects, I suppose, could be, you know, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, even from an organizational point of view, many different universities and colleges, you know, as Kathleen was talking about, the student-student interaction in that initial orientation is so important, but also student, lecturer and departmental interactions are so important in creating that sense of belonging. From a purely clinical perspective, if you can indulge me, I suppose there's this concept called belonging uncertainty that was coined back in the early 2000s by a social psychologist called Greg Walton. And the idea is that it's a state of mind which, you know, a person might suffer doubt in whether they feel connected or belonging to a particular environment. And what that does is that highlights then that I'll interpret my world that I don't fit in and suddenly create more and more withdrawal. So that's something that, you know, definitely plays out. And I see that in my own private practice, Rob, with a lot of young adolescent students joining from a rural area. It's a little bit different, but from a rural area going to a city environment and trying to fit in. And their whole interpretation of the educational system is that, oh, I don't kind of fit in here, so they keep looking through that lens, and it's very challenging to break that down. So they can be some factors.
I appreciate that. Kathleen, I know you talked about the importance of the orientation week, and I agree, and I can even, and this is going back a long time, but I can remember my first year at university, and it struck me how good of a job they did for first year students at my institution. Again, this is over 30 years ago. And what struck me as you were speaking is, well, what happens to the second, the third year students and the fourth year students? How are they brought into this fold and making them feel belonging, even though they've already been there? Can you share a little bit of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we try to tackle, because I'm in the School of Medicine based there, and we have a lot of different international students that come to study in UCD in the School of Medicine. And what we have done is, I think we have pared back what we do in orientation. I know academic is very important, but it's really about the holistic approach to their time in college. They need to perform academically, and for the medicine students, they're bright anyway. But we want them to also develop their own self of who they are. So in orientation, if we can focus on, as I said, the peer-to-peer, the peer mentor program, and joining clubs and societies, getting to know the other parts of themselves that they might want to explore. And what we have found is that the students, even though we don't have the resources to continue the peer mentor program going through the 6 years of medicine, or if it's, you know, some of the other programs, that they unofficially continue it, because the peer mentors get a sense of gratitude from being able to help somebody, and that gives them a sense of belonging again, that they have something to give to the students and to the school, and the peer mentors then for the following year will want to give that back again, and this is just building constantly on the sense of belonging. So, you know, I have an example of the importance of, you know, understanding the cultural differences, and that it is very important that you match up peers with people from a similar background. Not that you're trying to keep them separate, but I think just to help them get the sense of what this university is about. And I had this student one time, and she was from, she was, you know, from the other side of the world, and she had a peer mentor who was Irish, and she came to me and she said, I want to put in a complaint about my peer mentor. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, he said to me, come on, we'll take you out and we'll find you a husband. Now, in Ireland, that's very much just how we talk, as I'm taking you under my arm, let's go out, let's have a bit of fun, I'll get you to show you the town. Whereas for her, that was, you know, she took that very personally, as I'm not just a woman to become a wife, I'm here to learn. And when I explained that it was actually an enduring thing for him to say, it helped, for both parties to kind of understand we need to be mindful that people are coming from a different background. So I think if you can explain to them, that this is, something that happens to everybody, we all feel a bit of loneliness. I think they can settle into it and they can give back. I think with social media nowadays, people always look busy. There's that whole, I've got text messages, I'm, meeting a load of people, I'm in all kinds of WhatsApp groups, but really everyone's feeling it.
Absolutely, no, for sure. We definitely see that. And certainly at WPO, when it comes to the services that we're providing and the issues that are presenting, student loneliness and isolation are among the top presenting issues. Moving along, I know I could spend a lot more time on that question, but we do have an agenda to get through. In the 2021-2022 academic period, there were nearly 680,000 international students enrolled in the UK alone at higher education institutions. Reports suggest that international students are not seeking mental health support, further exacerbating mental health issues faced among this student demographic. Question, where is the gap or the barriers that prevent international students from accessing emotional support while studying abroad? Andrew, why don't you take this one first?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I suppose what's interesting is the first poll there, the stigma, the lack of awareness and resources and access to mental health care, the way I suppose the second two, lack of awareness and resources and access to the mental health care, were the ones that came out top there. And I think that's a real reflection of some of the challenges that international students face when they're trying to access emotional support. But along with that, I've already touched into the language component. I think is massive as well. Working therapeutically, you really need to be working in your own native tongue. It's really hard to connect. I could only imagine. I only practice in English. I don't speak another language well enough to practice therapeutically. But to connect, to create that emotional connection, it really has to be in, I feel, your mother tongue. So that's a really important component, and the availability of that, and then the cultural piece can be a barrier with that. And one that's probably not mentioned so much, but is, well, the accessibility. Where do I go? What's available? How do I even start this journey? Where do I look? And confidentiality. Is it confidential? Is it a safe space? Even if I get some resources, are the university, is the college going to hear about it? And even stigma, which you had highlighted there, that can play out, and I've seen that myself running a program in the UK with educational leaders. So a little bit different, not quite the student population, but with educational leaders, we were looking at putting together some kind of group support, group therapy kind of idea where they could share and work through their challenges as educational leaders. But we couldn't get the counseling or the therapy component to that. And beyond semantics, by changing the word to support or supervision, we were able to get a lot of buy-in. So there's something in how we actually promote as well is key to that. So some of the, go for therapy, go for counseling sessions, that can actually be deterring. Go to attend this support group, or framing things a little bit more creatively can definitely break down some of that barriers. But I feel that they're the pieces, probably some of the most important pieces, the language, the cultural piece, that definitely can get in the way of international students.
I really think you hit on something there when it comes to being a little more creative in how these initiatives are promoted, bearing in mind that with that international lens, the perception or reception of words is so important, and coming from different walks of life, it has different meanings. Sometimes it's a loaded term. So to think outside of the box and try and be as inclusive as possible is really, really important. Kathleen, institutionally, or from an academic institution's perspective, what do you think is the best way for academic institutions to promote well-being supports that are available?
I think one of a key aspect is for maybe some of the academic staff to also know the supports that are available. It doesn't mean that they have to know all about them, but just that there are supports available. Now, in my role, I'm kind of the touch person for any of the students that come into any problems. But I think the awareness that though we may be a culture that our families accept that maybe somebody might need to go talk to Andrew, or there's, a bit of counselling can help in talking things out. There are a lot of cultures that this is not really considered a proper support.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a part of that is if the student very often, when they come to their, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, stuff that maybe had been going on for them for years is really coming to head. And it's not disappearing for long periods of time, it's coming back more and more frequently. And I think for the students and the faculty to be able to say to students that if you go and talk to somebody, it's confidential. Your mother or your father can't ring me and tell me that, that I can say that you've seen somebody. I think that's really key, that they get a sense that they're actually grown up now and that everything's confidential, and that it's okay to go and talk to somebody, and it doesn't mean that there's something that they're doing against their culture or their family. And I think Andrew touched on this about the language thing. It's not just necessarily being able to speak a language. I do think if you have some counsellors available for students that are actually from a particular background, and I know, Robert, we've talked about this at past conferences, that one university that was at the conference with us had brought in an Asian counsellor because they found that sometimes students would go and talk to a counsellor. It would take 4 or 5 sessions to understand what an Asian mother can have on the influence of the family. And that's 4 sessions that are maybe lost that they could have got somewhere with the student. So I think if there's a little bit more of embracing not just the cultural language, but the actual culture. And this is just something that I think can really help students to feel a sense of comfort and support, and also reiterate the confidentiality piece for them.
100%. That confidentiality piece is absolutely critical. And I would also argue, to your point, that the being able to communicate in multiple languages for these international students is also very, very important, especially when it comes to programs and services around mental health and well-being. I mean, that's one of the things I'm so proud about working at WPO is our strength in being able to create promotion and awareness programs that cater to an international audience with our multilingual and culturally appropriate capabilities. So I think that's a big differentiator for us, and I'm glad that you hit on it. Before we move to the next poll, we had a comment from the audience that I'd like to share, and it reads, just a comment on how important Welcome Week is. Judging by my own lived experience as an international postgraduate student, the people operating and onboarding students being students themselves or alumni was key and provided a sense of relatability and community versus when done by academic or university staff. I think that's a very powerful comment, and I thank the attendee for sharing that and allowing us to share that with a wider group. So I just wanted to point that out. It reinforces everything that our panelists have said, and it's nice to get that affirmation from someone who's had that lived experience. On to the second poll. What additional mental health resources or support would you like to see implemented at your institution that doesn't exist today? So please don't be shy. Get your input in. We'll leave it for a few more seconds and we'll see what the results are. I mean, all of these to me look very, very important. I'm curious to see which one will trend the highest. Okay, well, there we go. It looked like targeted suicide prevention campaigns and resources had the highest Andrew, what are your thoughts on what you see?
Yeah, I suppose like yourself, Rob, I would have thought all four are really pertinent here. Targeted suicide prevention coming out the highest. Yeah, I think that's the one that everyone points to. But at the same time, I do think that a lot of universities and whether that's in Ireland, the UK, or throughout the world, they do have a lot of campaigns and resources related to suicide prevention, and there is a lot of awareness out there. Maybe it's about access and understanding how to connect with those different services. I think yeah, so I was probably a little bit surprised to see that as the top one, because I do think there's a lot of work out there around that in my experience.
Interesting. Kathleen, what are your thoughts on what you see?
I completely agree with Andrew. I'm so surprised as well. But again, I think it's the early intervention, maybe before, people are feeling suicidal, that, that they need to be targeted. I think the holistic well-being for services for students, as well as cultural awareness, is possibly an area that maybe is happening, but maybe there should be a bit more work done on that in order to show that the early intervention can help prevent, suicidal thoughts and students feeling they need to tap into those resources around suicide prevention. But I'm surprised too, and I will definitely take it on board myself in my own work.
I suspect, as is always the case with a topic as sensitive as suicide, and especially for this demographic, and especially for the institutions, that it does take a very particular place in the minds of those who are providing these supports and trying to address that concern. I know that when a student suicide occurs on campus, it is awful. Depending on the size of the institution, it can have significant ripple effects, and it can be devastating. So there's a lot of fear around it. I don't think there's enough conversation about it. So there's a lot of talk, but I don't think we get into the weeds about the actual topic. And to your point, the early intervention is really important. That old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think it couldn't be more true when we're talking about that topic of suicide, for sure. Which leads us to our third question. Traumatic experiences for students can include physical violence, car accidents, adversity such as poverty, discrimination, and sexual abuse. In fact, studies and reports have concluded that a significant number of students in the UK have experienced sexual harassment and violence during their time in higher education. How can institutions support students who experience and/or witness traumatic events? Kathleen, why don't you take that on first?
This is a very difficult situation, because these can be students that are experiencing trauma for the first time in their life and aren't even sure how they feel and what they're meant to do. I know in UCD we have a new unit that's been set up for the last almost 2 years now, Dignity and Respect, and they are specially trained for students and staff actually that have experienced any kind of trauma like this. We also do, and I also do think it's important that if a staff member who doesn't have any kind of training on trauma, have a student come to them and they divulge this terrible thing that's happened to them, and if they don't know how to react, I think that's a key piece as well. It doesn't mean they have to have a lot of training, but just to know that this is how you can direct the student to this service, and then for them to be able to kind of deal with the trauma. I think for students that have had a trauma like this, again, knowing that they're not going to be suddenly fixed in a day, that it's going to be something that you're going to get ongoing support, and that, it's okay to feel uncomfortable and it's okay not to feel okay, and to support them through the process. And I think to be able to give them an idea as to what the road is going to look like for them, Because I think sometimes students will come to me after a period of months and go, I'm still not feeling great. Why am I not fixed yet? And I think the ongoing support is key to this, that we don't go, okay, go here, then you'll be fixed, all done and dusted. I think it's the ongoing support and it's the recognition that it is a terrible thing that's happened, you know, and that we're here for you.
Andrew, what advantages and challenges present for students who don't feel safe or comfortable getting support from services on campus?
Yeah, I suppose just to follow on from what Kathleen was saying, definitely. I mean, with trauma, it can be viewed as a more long-term support and more robust, and it can go on for a period of time. One of the points that I'd like to just mention is that, you know, I might, or someone might experience a single traumatic incident, but it might take 2-3 weeks before they even notice that something is actually happening, because they just go into automatic pilot, and then it's over a period of time. That a term we'd use is kind of watchful waiting in the clinical world, to watch after a traumatic incident, make sure that over the next 2 to 3 weeks that there's a normal process to this. 2, 3, 4 days, yeah, I'm probably all out of sync, but maybe after that 2, 3 weeks, if I'm still not where I think I should be, whatever that looks like, as in maybe I'm not eating, not sleeping, all things like that, maybe that's the point that the individual might need support. And that's something that we find all the time, that the people that come to us kind of a couple of weeks out, I don't know why I'm, you know, why I'm not sleeping, why I'm not eating, why this isn't happening. And they don't link it back because it's 3 or 4 weeks on from the initial incident. But that is a real message that I'd like to put out there, you know, that people disconnect from that incident. Yes, that happened, but these are the symptoms, these are the results and the outcomes of that 3-4 weeks down the road that then can progressively get worse. So yeah, like Kathleen was saying, early intervention, and I suppose it's a bit about being more proactive than reactive. But some of the challenges that present for students who don't feel safe, again, I mean, it all comes back to confidentiality. You know, if I share with Kathleen, is this going to be safe? If they share with me, is it going to be safe? If they share with you, Robert, how safe is it? That is the cornerstone of any type of support in any kind of mental health area, that, you know, there's a fear about, is this going to be disclosed? And, you know, how that's probably the biggest safety concern, I think. So it's about being transparent about the limitations of what safety looks like, what I can do. Yeah, listen, you're sharing that with me, I can go ahead and I can get you support. However, I might have to talk to an outside provider, I might have to talk to a counsellor. Are you comfortable with that? So as long as there's autonomy and openness in that conversation, I think it can be navigated quite well. But that's one of the main you know, challenges, I think, is the managing the confidentiality piece, and that's after they come to talk to you, that you're managing that.
I was going to say
Yeah,
the things that I take away from what you just said were the disconnect from the actual event that they've experienced or witnessed, the time lag that may occur between the event and the onset of symptoms, and the realization that they, or maybe not even realization, that these symptoms are connected to something that has happened in the past, and then coupled with that scary notion of confidentiality. Kathleen, you know, how do you address that real fear about students being afraid to get support from services on campus? This is something that you must encounter or have encountered in your career. Can you share your experience on that?
yeah, I think just to take up on what Andrew's saying, even if it's something like a bereavement, like a student can come to you, if it's a bereavement of somebody close, you know, in a different circumstance, they might think, oh, I'm going to get help now and I'll be better. But again, that's something that there's no stepping stone. This is what you follow. You don't know how it's going to happen. But I think on something like, say, sexual assault or something like, I have had students that have come to me, and obviously they may have said something to their parents, or their parents notice their behavior is different, and, you know, trying to kind of butt in on what they feel their child needs, or, you know, their son or daughter needs at this time. but really having that relationship with the student and it being confidential is very key. And I really think that is the pillar, that if you don't have that, the student is not going to come back to you again. And I obviously am dealing with people who are training to become doctors, and they really have a fear about talking to somebody, because this could be potentially a colleague to them in the future. And they, even though we're trying to, disarm stigma, it's still strong out there, the stigma attached to any kind of sexual assault or any kind of trauma in relation to that. So I really think the most important thing is two things. One is the confidentiality, and the second is patience and time to heal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about the patience and time, for sure. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Kathleen. I want to ask, do you think it's advantageous for higher ed institutions to be able to offer an optional third-party service that students can reach out to deal with these situations, in light of the perception of confidentiality and all the things that you just discussed? What are your thoughts?
Well, I can only speak from my own experience. We actually have a counselling service that's attached to UCD, and we can send referrals, and it doesn't mean we have to give any kind of detail, but usually if it comes from myself or somebody else as a student advisor, it does get priority. And we would always ask for GDPR. It's very tricky that the student giving you their permission to do that. But at the same time, it's really important that we just empower the student. We don't want to be pushing them into getting help if they're not ready for it yet. Like Andrew was saying, we have to notice when they're ready. It might be 2-3 weeks later, it could be 6 months later that they go, do you know what, now I feel like maybe I need help. So I think helping to empower them and advocate for them and to know the services is the best thing we can do, because this is part of their learning process for them developing as a person. They need to learn to mind themselves and take care of themselves. And I think they will get more out of the experience of getting counselling or help if they have actually wanted to do it themselves.
Great, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Moving forward, when faced with distress, students may turn to faculty for support. Oftentimes, faculty may be the first person that a student goes to when experiencing an issue of some sort or another. Staff can become overloaded and may not have the adequate training to deal with such situations. Kathleen, what role should faculty play in supporting students' mental health?
That's a really tough question, because we all have our own little job that we need to do. I think induction, before term starts, so that the faculty are aware of what the supports are. It just has to be a couple of hours, and letting them know. And, certain people have certain jobs that maybe that's not where their comfort zone is. And I think making sure that they know what the supports are and letting them signpost the students to that support, I feel like is the role that they need to play in. I think there can, we often have these one good adults, in a school that students will become aware of, or but I think we have to be careful of having everyone doing everyone's job. I think it's really better if they just know where a student can go and signpost them. Because people can feel uncomfortable. Even when we had COVID and people then suddenly had to start going in camera, that was pushing people out of comfort zones. Their job was maybe to be there and to teach in a lecture setting, not necessarily on camera. So I think we have to be mindful of that as well. But I think having sessions before term starts and letting faculty know what support services are available and where to direct the students.
Do you think enough time and energy and resources are spent in those types of initiatives across higher ed?
I think in my school we do, but I do think that it's, and maybe that's because it's a professional degree, I think that more time could be put into this. Again, it's putting in those safety nets before it's preempting that there's going to be a problem. Let's make sure our students not being passed from Billy to Jack. And I think that can be frustrating for students. If they do reach out, then they get the wrong information or the misinformation. They give up. And maybe that's to do with that poll on more signposting about suicide prevention. It's about people having the knowledge as to what there is and what supports are out there.
Thank you. What type of training programs would be suitable for faculty to respond to emotional crisis situations? Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to follow on from what Kathleen's saying there, I think, it's a real challenge. Everyone has to stay kind of in their own level of comfortability around their own limitations of what they can do and what they cannot do. But being able to signpost and know what resources are available is definitely key. But if we want to go down the more practical route of what kind of trainings, I mean, I myself have delivered some trainings for WPO in relation to this area. I'm not trying to plug WPO as such, but we have a particular program called AIR that I've delivered lots of times for many different reasons with multiple organizations, and it will be all senior management or departmental heads. And the AIR program is about bringing awareness, intervention, and resilience. It's a resilience training, and simply that training is just about how to manage those type of conversations that Kathleen's talking about when someone comes. There is that, managing the confidentiality. The training is just about how to manage that in a very professional way and how to get someone the right support. So that's something that I suppose over the past 3 to 4 years has really grown exponentially here at WPO, that particular training. Or another one would be more suited towards the trauma end of things that I'd have also delivered, would be kind of like a psychological first aid training, and that would be more for like the types of maybe more critical incident type stuff, like first responder type training. Again, just about how to have conversations to try and stabilize and normalize a situation, not offering any clinical intervention, just normalizing that particular situation, stabilizing, and then going for that wraparound support. So there are two kind of trainings that I've delivered myself that I'm quite passionate about, but I feel will be useful across all different sectors, because what it does is it empowers the individual who's had that 2-hour experience go, okay, that's not as daunting as I thought it was, on how to have that conversation to build that bridge to the next level of support that may or may not be needed, because not everybody needs further support as well after a traumatic incident,
Thank you, Andrew. I think you may have hit on something for a future webinar, and how we approach mental health holistically for higher ed as an entire community. I mean, what I'm talking about is the current state of affairs, typically as I see it, is you have the faculty, you have the staff, and you have the students. And the approach traditionally has been to address those individual silos as such individual silos. And perhaps there is a conversation to be had about looking at it and approaching those three distinct stakeholders together as one community. They are one community, and maybe the approach needs to change. We'll save that for another day. Before I get to the third poll question, there are some additional comments that I'd like to read and share with the group today. The first comment that I just received: ongoing support is definitely key. I think also, institutionally speaking, accommodating student learning needs along with emotional ones is very important. As a student, knowing that my school or university colleague can support me academically via academic mentoring, mitigating assessment considerations, etc., has a tremendous impact on student well-being and stress pertaining to academic performance. That's a very key insight, and thank you to the attendee for sharing. The second one, short and sweet: financial support and student hardship funds being accessible to all students is very important as well. So yes, I think that financial piece is very important. I don't know if we're going to get to that exactly today, but we would be remiss if we didn't include that as part of the conversation today. On to the third poll.
Well, Robert, could I just add in?
Please, yes.
I do think, the first comment by the student there is, we have orientation in the first week when they start in, and I think that is important. But I actually do also think for the second trimester, it's important to do a reorientation for students, that they may have missed out on some bits trying to find their way around the campus for the first trimester. And I think that is key, that we don't just do it once off, that it's ongoing, you know, and we create opportunities for students to learn more about the supports, you know, throughout their life cycle in university.
I couldn't agree with you more. When I've been working in this industry for over 15 years, and I'll often use the analogy, when someone has a toothache, they know exactly who they're going to call, where they're going to go, and how they're going to deal with that. When someone is experiencing a mental health issue or concern, it's not always as obvious. So that communication, that promotion and awareness needs to be done on a more consistent and frequent basis, to your point. So I fully agree with that sentiment. On to the poll. What are the best methods for communication regarding mental health support for students? And there are the choices. You have social media, student societies / student government, curriculum, faculty / staff. Please get your vote in. I'm curious what our attendees have to say about this question. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Kathleen, why don't you start first? What are your thoughts on what you see?
I think that's exactly what I would have thought, 100%. I think we need to communicate in the way that young people communicate nowadays, and it's through social media. That's 100% what I thought would happen with that poll.
Andrew?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I didn't think it'd be that much of a difference, though, social media being so high. But I suppose it's about the accessibility. It's about the bite size as well. Small snippets. The message can be put across in multiple different formats. I still think, though, it's there, faculty and staff. But I suppose that's for those who actually do reach out and do contact, you know, that the faculty and staff, whereas social media reaches those that maybe don't reach out to the faculty and staff. Yeah, very interesting.
It is interesting, and I will say that I was privy to a small study that was done by WPO. It was, again, very small, but it was measuring this type of question about communication for mental health support on a university campus. And what struck me about the results of this small study was that students acknowledged that social media was at the same time a cause of decreasing mental health and mental well-being. Yet it's also where they live. So it's almost a vicious circle where they know that it's not good for them and their mental health, but that's how they're going to communicate, and that's how they're going to receive information and share information. So it's a bit of a dilemma. I'm going to be unpopular here and suggest that, in my opinion and in my experience, when a student goes to university or college, yes, they're training to be doctors and lawyers or sociologists or whatever, but I think it's imperative that within the curriculum itself, these ideas of self-care and mental health be factored in to the curriculum itself somehow, some way. We are not only teaching students to be a profession, but we're teaching them to be citizens of the world and human beings. And I know it's not very popular with this group, but I think there should be some way to include communication regarding mental health within the curriculum itself. Again, perhaps we leave that for another day.
Just to follow on to that from that, Rob, there, really about what you were saying about the social media, I couldn't agree more with you. You know, there is that kind of paradox there with it, that initially it's social media is there to create connections, but it can have that kind of negative effect where it does feed back to what we were talking about at the very start, a sense of isolation, a sense of comparing and despairing. So it can actually be negative as well. So it's really interesting, because I really do think it's paradoxical in that way. There's the fear of missing out that can come up as well from the social media thing. So yeah, great point.
Yeah, and Absolutely agree as well. I have been running this planting of daffodils in October, November, getting the students to be outside and actually physically beside a person digging a hole rather than seeing something, you know, on whatever social media platform. And the uncomfortableness in their body language of like, really, I'm going to dig a hole, and many of them never having seen a daffodil bulb or no, even the Irish students not knowing which way is up for the daffodil bulb. It's really short, it's less than 5 minutes, and you can just see how they leave kind of with a smile on their face, and they've had a bit of interaction with a couple of other people in person. I'm not saying that they're obviously interacting with people a lot, but there's so much dependence on social media as a social platform. And sometimes just getting out, as you know, Andrew was saying earlier, sleeping, eating, you know, that kind of thing, a little bit of exercise, it can make such a world of difference in how a person can feel about themselves. So even though social media is the platform, maybe that's just all they know. Maybe we need to, you know, do some of the old-fashioned ways of road shows across the campus, talking about services, that they can interact with, ask questions, see that other people are asking questions, you know, to normalize it a bit.
Yeah, I'm curious, as time continues to pass, social media becomes more entrenched, more ingrained. Perhaps there will be a coming about a full circle, if you will, to what you just said, Kathleen, of returning to some older ideas and older initiatives that may resonate once again with this population. I will sit back and wait as I grow old and watch. Moving over to the next question. Over the past 5 years, higher education institutions have seen a significant increase in the need for counseling services. In the institutions that offer counseling programs, would they benefit from a holistic approach? Kathleen, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so my thoughts on this are, I do definitely think a holistic approach is correct, but I also feel that when people hit third level, it's when stuff is coming up. So I know it seems like it's, oh, is it when something happens, they suddenly go in the door of college, that suddenly they have all these problems. I don't necessarily think that that's it. I think, you know, some of these issues may have started when they were 14, 15, 16, and they just didn't actually deal with it, or they didn't grow the way maybe they should have, or might have had the support, or, you know, without having to be something traumatic that happened. I definitely would not necessarily want to be a teenager again. You know, it's a tough time. So I definitely think a holistic approach is the best way forward, because it's not just about their academic learning. It's about getting to know who they are as a person. I just think it's a coincidence, you know, in a way that it's happening at third level, because that's the age when stuff can come up that they need to go, hang on, something's not right. You know, if somebody starts to self-harm and they don't know why they are, you know, whatever they were using as a coping mechanism is not working anymore. And I think that can be one of the things that happens. I know it's not quite directly answering your question, but I just think that it's at third level that these things come up. And I think talking about what happened with you as a child, what's going on with you now, as a holistic approach is the way to go, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely, and I appreciate the candor. Andrew, what are your thoughts about this idea of the holistic approach?
Yeah, definitely. Holistic approach is, I would say, nearly the only way to go. Again, someone mentioned earlier, you know, financial stress, I think in one of the comments, and we've touched off it, we're not going to get into that, but like, that's a holistic approach. Let's look at the financial side, let's look at the accommodation side, etc., beyond just a counselling hat. And even within mental health supports, ourselves, you know, we'd engage in offering counselling supports across the world in many different languages, but not everybody needs counselling. There's other programs there that are as useful, you know, like coaching or mindfulness programs, but probably the one that probably goes a little bit under the radar that's used quite a lot is nearly this kind of support line approach. because a lot of the students that we would have coming to us, they're not actually really looking for counseling support per se, your traditional 6-session, 8-session, 10-session model. It's more situational stress. It's more, I've got this exam tomorrow. It's more, I'm up half the night. And having the access to the helpline or the support line where there's a qualified, counselor at the other end, that's where we see a lot of the work being done, that having that access really offers then that holistic piece where they can work with someone in the moment to get over that hurdle, whatever it is, call back in again, and then maybe get more robust support if needed. But that's a bridge that I would say over the past 5 or 6 years has really grown exponentially, that in the moment situational stressor where you can just talk confidentially and offload with someone. And not only, going back to my initial points about culture and language, we can offer that as well. So there's a safety in that. So
yeah, that's a perfect segue as we near to the close of this session, just to remind the audience that Workplace Options offers a world-class student assist program. And one of the biggest differentiators is that time to care clinical answer model. We know that students often, when they reach out, are not necessarily interested in setting up structured therapy. To your point, they have a problem, they want to talk, and they want to talk now. They don't want to wait. And because we have that clinician answer model, that empowers WPO to be able to provide that in-the-moment support and be on that call with the student for as long as they want. I just want to remind the audience that the Student Assist program, in addition to that in-the-moment support, provides that comprehensive emotional support through structured therapy, through face-to-face appointments, or on the telephone or video. We also offer a full suite of coaching, both life and wellness, as well as practical resources dealing with financial, for example, or legal, designed specifically for students. And there is an overview available to download in the handout section in your window pane on the webinar. And if you want to learn more about this program, please contact us directly at service@workplaceoptions.com. So before I get to the last question, there's one more comment here that I want to address, and it's simply, the comment is peer-to-peer support is essential. And I highlight this comment because I think we touched on it right at the beginning with question number 1 when Kathleen was talking about the orientation week and how the peer mentors play such a crucial role in fostering those relationships, diminishing isolation and loneliness on campus. Kathleen, any more thoughts on this comment about peer-to-peer support, and if UCD is doing anything around that?
Yeah, we have a massive program that we run, peer mentor program, and so for me in my school in medicine, I do think that students appreciate it, but like I actually go to the lengths of matching up a peer with another peer from the same country, and obviously in the same program. So we have, radiography, the graduate entry medicine, we have direct entry medicine, we have a lot of international students, and I will pair them up with a person that has volunteered to be a peer mentor from the exact same background. And that is key, because they are going to ask silly questions like, which way is Dublin? Like for an Irish student, they're not even going to, like that lives in Dublin, they're not going to even think that a person doesn't know that. What is Penny's? That's a shop that we have that has all kinds of cheap stuff. You can get your sheets there if you need for your bedding. These are things that are really important that maybe a student from Dublin won't understand for a student from Canada, for example. You know what I mean? That's really key, that they have a sense of, wow, you did this before and you felt how I did, and look how great you seem to be getting along now. And to be able to give that back again, it is. And the students all volunteer. They get a hoodie out of it. They get a, they help the students on their day. They give them a campus tour. They get a bit of lunch. And it's such a small but really meaningful part of a student's beginning of their life cycle in college. So I can say we've been doing it for years and it works amazing.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to draw attention to the first poll. We didn't get a chance to show the results. I want to show that now. And that poll question was, what do you believe is the biggest barrier to seeking help for mental health issues among students? And the two highest categories that were responded to were lack of awareness and resources and access to mental health care. Briefly, before we get to the last question, Andrew, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing on this poll?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I'd agree with that 100%. And that's the biggest challenge. And I think we've talked about it. We've touched off a lot of this through what we've been talking about over the past 45 minutes or so, is about, lack of resources and not lack of resources, but the lack of awareness around what resources are out there and how to, engage student populations in accessing the mental health care. And I think across our conversation, we did offer some solutions. Stigma, though, is the one that kind of I thought would have been up there too, a little bit higher, because there still is that stigma around, reaching out, looking for support. Even in my own practice, I have a psychologist that comes to me for support, and that was a huge barrier. They had this sense of, well, I'm a psychologist, I shouldn't need to go to get support. So even within my own profession, there is that kind of stigma still playing out.
Kathleen, any comments?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised the stigma wasn't higher. The only thing I can think of from seeing those results is that maybe by the time a person is looking for the mental health support and they're Googling it or they're trying to find it, they can't find it. So there's a lack of awareness. So the stigma isn't as important anymore because they want the support. And maybe then the access to it it's not instant. I know you touched on this, Robert, earlier, that students want it now, So that's what my read on those results is. I think that there is no awareness of what the resources are, but unless, the way you say, you buy a red car and then everywhere you go, you see a red car. So maybe it's just they just aren't looking for it until the very last moment when the stigma is not important. They're kind of in a bad spot, and there aren't always appointments available, within a 2-week waiting period. And I think that's my thoughts on that. But I do agree that we need a bit more access to mental health care.
Yes, I think that's the age-old challenge that we continue to battle. As we wrap up, Andrew and Kathleen, I wanted to get your final thoughts and perspective on the role institutions play in supporting students' well-being. Do universities have a duty of care for their students? Andrew, why don't you lead off on this one?
Yeah, I suppose this is a difficult one for me, to be honest, Rob. And I suppose I see a parallel between my own self as a therapist and a university. And, in my private practice, I have a duty of care to my clients. But the limitations of that duty of care are that I am responsible to them and not for them. And I think I see a university in the same place, or that there's a responsibility to the student, but I'm not responsible for them. And that is a really, really tough balance to get that right. It's a very tight line for me to get that right, because you want to empower the students, you want them to have autonomy, but at the same time you still have a certain amount of responsibility to be at least offering. So it's a tight line for me, because the students, that there's increased pressures, there's the financial, the accommodations, there's academic pressures as well, which we actually didn't really get into today. And all that can lead to mental health concerns. So to wrap it up for me, I suppose universities might some universities might need to step back from paternalizing their role, and others might need to step forward a little bit. So it's a tough one to help the development of the students so they can achieve academic success while offering support. I suppose it's not an either or, but it's a both and. If I could finish with that, I think, so it's a tough one. I don't think I've answered it, Rob, because I think it's a very tough one to answer.
Yeah, I know. I agree, Andrew. This is it's a really tough topic. It's a tough question, and I'll give Kathleen last words, but I will say again, in my experience, to witness the change within higher education and the roles that the universities and specifically the on-campus counseling centers have played, what they did 20, 30 years ago was very different to what they are doing now. Kathleen, your thoughts on this last question?
Yeah, I'm a bit like Andrew as well. It's a very thin line, but what I would say is I think universities know what the life cycle of the academic year is for the student. And say like week 6, we know that's going to be when the first assignments are being due, and maybe that's a week that there are certain initiatives that can go across campus to help, manage that a little bit. And maybe then the week, before their exams, then we know they're going to be extra stressed and they need a bit more library time, they need a bit more quiet time. I think being aware of the life cycle of a student in their academic year is one great way that a university can help to be supportive to a student as a duty of care. They know this is coming up. It's like we know in your families, like say Easter's coming up now, is that a stressful time? What do you do to overcome some of that? And I think that's an area that the universities can have a duty of care. Again, with Andrew's point, I think we're here to empower the students. We're not here to fix them. We're here to empower them when they are ready to deal with whatever it is they're dealing with. And again, as I said earlier, I do feel that it is also the time of a person's development that they are starting to have to make their own decisions. Up to this stage, they were told what chapter to read, they were told what questions to answer, they were told how to answer them. When now they're in university, they're being told they have to think for themselves. So I think the only thing that I can say that I feel that a university can do as a duty of care to students is knowing what their life cycle is for that year and how we can best support them through that.
Andrew, Kathleen, I just want to thank you both so very much for participating in today's webinar and sharing your expertise, your insights with us. I enjoyed today's conversation very much. I also want to thank our audience for attending. I know time is precious. I hope that we have given you some good value for the 60 minutes or so that you spent with us. I know I feel pretty good about the conversation that took place today. You will receive a survey at the end of this webinar where you will have the opportunity to add comments, any feedback that you can share either about what you heard today or the topics that you'd like to see covered in future webinars would be greatly appreciated. So please feel free to share them. Once again, thank you for all participating. Stay safe and have a great day. Bye for now.
Thanks. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Kathleen.